The photograph is ordinary at first glance. A city street, stone buildings, iron lampposts. The caption reads simply as Market Square, Stockholm, circa 1890. No fire damage, no rubble, no scaffolding. And yet, no people. The street is wide enough for crowds. The architecture suggests a mature city, not a frontier. Census records from Stockholm list 250,000 residents by the end of the 19th century. But in the photograph, there are no pedestrians, no carts, no vendors, only absence. The official explanation points to long exposure times. Early cameras required stillness, they say. Movement disappeared. But exposure times do not erase everything. They do not erase market debris. They do not erase horses tied to posts. They do not erase children sitting still. This same emptiness appears in Paris, St. Petersburg, Chicago, Melbourne. Different cities, same silence. If the streets were built for people who were not yet there, then what event cleared the world before it was repopulated? By conventional history, the old world ended gradually. Wars swept across continents, plagues decimated populations, revolutions toppled monarchies, industrialization transformed economies, each change documented, each transition explained. Textbooks describe the 18th and 19th centuries as an era of rebuilding after medieval stagnation, stone replaced by brick, superstition replaced by science, darkness replaced by enlightenment. The narrative flows smoothly from one century to the next. Census records appear reassuringly linear. European populations rise decade by decade. Cities expand outward from medieval cores. Railroads spread across previously isolated regions. Trade routes multiply. Architecture evolves from Baroque to neoclassical to industrial. Everything progresses as it should. Yet even in official records, strange footnotes appear. Margins note estimated figures without explanation. Whole districts are counted, then recounted differently a decade later with no accounting for the discrepancy. Population totals sometimes adjust downward before rising again. In isolation, this seems like bureaucratic imperfection, the messy reality of governance before modern data collection. But together, these records form the baseline we are taught to trust. They construct a world where change happened gradually, where populations grew organically, where cities expanded naturally to meet demand. A story repeated often enough becomes infrastructure itself, invisible, assumed, rarely questioned. Infrastructure assumes continuity, and continuity may be the assumption that fails. The earliest city photographs are treated as celebrations of progress. Daguerreotypes of Paris boulevards commissioned during Baron Haussmann's renovations, albumen prints of Vienna's Ringstrasse, glass plates of Boston's government district. These images appear in archives as evidence of civilization's triumph over chaos, proof that humanity had finally mastered the urban environment. Yet they share a detail that rarely makes captions. They are empty. Broad avenues stretch toward vanishing points with no traffic. Government buildings stand with no guards visible at entrances. Commercial districts show shopfronts but no customers, no merchants, no signs of commerce. In some images, shadows suggest midday sun, the busiest hours, yet still no crowd fills the frame. Long exposure is the standard answer. Early photographic technology required subjects to remain motionless for seconds or minutes. Movement blurred into invisibility. People became ghosts, then nothing. This explanation satisfies initial curiosity, but long exposure does not explain the absence of static life. Benches are empty when they should hold resting figures. Doorways are open but unoccupied when someone should be visible in the threshold. Market squares show stalls but no goods, stages but no performers. Even the detritus of urban life, carts, barrels, discarded newspapers, tethered animals, is missing. Charles Marville's photographs of Paris, taken during the 1860s transformations, show entire neighborhoods cleared of habitation. Street after street of finished buildings, completed infrastructure, installed gas lamps, all waiting in silence. Census numbers from the same period do not show equivalent displacement. If hundreds of thousands lived in Paris, where did they go during the day? If they existed, why does no trace of them appear in these thoroughly documented streets? The explanation holds for one photograph, perhaps two. It strains across 20. It breaks across 200. Different photographers, different cities, different continents, different decades. Yet, the same absence echoes through them all. If cities were alive, where did their stillness go? The camera did not arrive early to document empty streets. It arrived after something had already happened. Buildings are treated as witnesses to gradual human achievement. Cathedrals, capitals, train stations, structures that imply generations of coordinated labor, accumulated knowledge, cultural continuity. Official histories credit specific architects, known construction periods, documented funding sources. These explanations satisfy until the timelines compress impossibly. Cologne Cathedral appears in records as begun in the 13th century and completed in the 19th century, 600 years of construction. Yet photographs from the 1880s show stone precision and structural uniformity that suggests coordinated execution, not piecemeal accumulation across centuries. The quality does not degrade with time. The design does not shift with changing architectural fashions. It appears complete, as if finished by a single generation working from a unified plan. Chicago's civic buildings rise within years after the Great Fire of 1871, structures exhibiting neoclassical mastery, the kind normally attributed to Old World civilizations with centuries of stoneworking tradition, appear in a frontier city barely decades old. Official records credit American architects trained in European methods. But training does not explain instant expertise. Practice does not appear overnight. Yet the buildings stand, fully realized, requiring no apprenticeship period, no gradual refinement of technique. St. Petersburg presents the same impossibility. Founded in 1703 on marshland, the city displays architectural sophistication within decades that rivals capitals centuries older. Massive palaces, uniform boulevards, coordinated infrastructure, all appearing too quickly for organic development. Architectural drawings exist in some archives, but many appear finalized after buildings already stood, added to explain what had been found rather than to guide what would be built. Construction records describe adaptation more often than creation. Buildings described as renovated with no documented original construction. Infrastructure described as upgraded with no record of what preceded the upgrade. Foundations described as reinforced that show no sign of prior weakness. The language suggests inheritance rather than invention. Blueprints explain construction. They establish intent, sequence, methodology. They do not explain inheritance, the quiet claiming of what already existed. What if these buildings were not built by the civilizations that occupy them? What if they were claimed, renamed, reinterpreted by populations that arrived afterward? Population records are expected to grow incrementally. Births exceed deaths in healthy populations. Immigration adds predictable numbers. Census data should reflect smooth curves, the mathematical expression of organic demographic change. But in city after city across the 19th century, the numbers refuse to behave. St. Petersburg nearly doubles between census counts in the 1840s without corresponding birth records or immigration documentation that would explain the surge. The city's population leaps from roughly 400,000 to over 600,000 in a decade, an increase that would require unprecedented immigration or birth rates, neither of which appear in supporting records. Margins in the census books note adjusted estimate and figure reconstructed without explaining the methodology. San Francisco explodes in population after 1850, officially attributed to the gold rush. Yet early photographs show infrastructure already sized for massive growth, harbors designed for heavy traffic, streets laid out for dense settlement, civic buildings scaled for major population centers. The infrastructure precedes the population it supposedly served. Census records show 25,000 residents in 1850 and over 340,000 by 1890. The growth appears in numbers, but the infrastructure appears first. American frontier towns repeat the pattern. Cities in the Great Plains show populations in the hundreds, while photographs reveal civic architecture designed for thousands. Buildings stand empty, waiting. Streets extend beyond inhabited areas. Railroad stations serve communities not yet present in census data. A U.S. Census clerk noted in 1870 that population was likely undercounted due to displacement. Displacement from where? The phrase appears without context, without explanation, a bureaucratic fragment suggesting movement without origin. European cities show similar jumps. London, Paris, Berlin all experienced population surges in the mid-19th century that outpaced documented immigration and recorded births. The official explanation points to industrialization drawing rural populations cityward. But rural census records do not show corresponding depopulation. The people appear in cities without disappearing from countryside tallies. You cannot count people who do not yet exist, unless the cities were built first, waiting, and populations arrived later to fill spaces already prepared, unless the infrastructure anticipated inhabitants who would eventually be inserted into the historical record. Between the mid-1800s and the early 1900s, millions of children appear in institutional records with no documented lineage. The orphan train movement alone, operating from 1854 to 1929, relocated an estimated 200,000 children from East Coast cities to rural communities across the United States. Intake logs from founding institutions repeat the same phrases across thousands of entries. Origin unknown. Parents deceased, details unavailable. Found abandoned, no family identified. Foundling hospitals in Europe report unprecedented volumes during the same period. Paris, London, Moscow, and Vienna established massive institutional systems to process children arriving with no documentation, no family connections, and no verifiable history. The Hôpital des Enfants. Trouves in Paris processed thousands annually. Records describe infants left at turning wheels with no identifying information, toddlers found wandering streets with no memory of parents, and children arriving in groups with fabricated or absent documentation. The scale defies standard explanations. Poverty produces orphans, certainly. War, disease, and industrial accidents all create children without parents. But the numbers surge beyond what these causes alone could generate. And the documentation consistently notes not just absent parents, but absent origin, no home region identified, no prior residence recorded, and no extended family traced. Infant incubator exhibitions at world fairs displayed premature babies as technological curiosities, charging admission to view rows of infants in glass cases. The 1896 Berlin exhibition featured Dr. Martin Cooney's infant incubator display, which toured fairs across Europe and America for decades. Official narratives describe these as medical demonstrations, but the exhibitions also process children with murky origins, providing institutional documentation where none existed before. The babies on display often had no families to return to, and they entered the system through the spectacle. A civilization rebuilding after gradual decline would preserve ancestry. Family records would survive wars and migrations, Lineage would remain traceable even through disruption. But a civilization repopulating after catastrophic loss would have no ancestry to preserve. It would begin again with children who had no verifiable past, only institutional intake forms marking their entry into recorded history. A society of orphans is a society without memory. Who were these children replacing? By 1893, when the Chicago World's Columbian Exposition opened, it presented itself as a temporary marvel. White city, built in Jackson Park to celebrate progress and then vanish. Official records describe feverish construction, armies of workers, architectural innovation executed under impossible deadlines. The fair covered 600 acres, featured more than 200 buildings and attracted 27 million visitors over 6 months. Then demolition. Officially, these structures were always meant to be temporary. Staff plastered over wooden frames designed for visual impact rather than permanence. Photographs support this narrative, showing construction materials consistent with temporary exhibition space. Yet other photographs reveal details that suggest different origins. Foundations extend deeper than temporary structures require. Electrical systems show sophistication beyond what was necessary for 6-month exhibitions. Hydraulic infrastructure indicates long-term planning. Exhibition logs describe buildings adapted for use rather than constructed from scratch, language that suggests modification of existing structures rather than creation of new ones. The Paris Exposition Universelle of 1889 follows the same pattern. The Eiffel Tower remains, but hundreds of other structures vanished. Buildings showing architectural sophistication that supposedly took years to design and months to construct then disappeared. The 1904 St. Louis World's Fair covered 1,200 acres with neoclassical buildings that photographs show as architecturally unified, stylistically coherent, structurally complete. Most were demolished within a year. Documentation describes these exhibitions as showcasing future possibilities, visions of what cities could become with modern planning and technology. But the photographs suggest a different relationship to time. Not futures imagined, but pasts remembered. Not innovations displayed, but inheritances temporarily revealed before being dismantled and erased. Similar fairs appear in Philadelphia, Omaha, Buffalo, San Diego. Same architectural styles, same construction impossibilities, same thorough demolition. If these were temporary exhibitions, why foundations designed for permanence? If showcase structures, why such complete removal? The pattern holds globally. Exhibitions that arrive too quickly, display too much sophistication, then vanish too completely. Temporary cities leave permanent questions. Why build civilizations twice, once for exhibitions, again for actual habitation, unless the exhibitions were not built at all, unless they were revealed? The photographs return with different meaning now. New York, Moscow, Melbourne, Buenos Aires, different continents, different architectural traditions, different census records, yet the same stillness pervades the images. Broad streets extend into empty distance. Civic squares show no crowds. Commercial districts reveal infrastructure but no commerce. In some images, a single figure appears blurred, ghostly movement captured during long exposure. This proves the photographic technology could record motion as blur. Yet these isolated figures emphasize rather than explain the emptiness. One blurred person in a street designed for thousands. One merchant in a market square built for crowds. The presence of these fragments makes the absence of others more conspicuous. Technical manuals from the period document exposure times for different photographic processes. Daguerreotypes required several minutes. Later, dry plate processes reduced exposure to seconds. By the 1880s, snapshot photography existed, capable of freezing movement, capturing crowds, recording active street life. Yet the empty streets persist across all these technological periods. Early photographs show emptiness. Later photographs show the same emptiness. The technology changed and the absence remained. Archival collections contain thousands of these images. Municipal archives, historical societies, university collections all preserve 19th century urban photography. characterized by architectural presence and human absence. Some archives note the peculiarity in catalogue descriptions, unusually devoid of inhabitants. Empty street scene, cause unknown. No visible population despite midday timing, the archivists noticed. They documented the strangeness, but explanation remained elusive. The camera records what remains, not what preceded. If urban populations existed at the densities census records claim, photographic evidence should reflect this reality. Street photography should show congestion, activity, human presence proportional to recorded inhabitant numbers. Instead, the photographs show prepared spaces, infrastructure complete, systems installed, architecture finished, waiting in silence. Modern explanations point to deliberate staging, photographers clearing streets to capture buildings without obstruction. But this requires coordination across hundreds of photographers, dozens of cities, multiple decades and different nations. It requires unanimous aesthetic preference for emptiness over life. It requires systematic erasure of human presence from the photographic record. Absence is not nothing, it is a record of removal or of arrival not yet completed. The streets were built, the buildings stood finished. The populations that would eventually fill them had not yet been inserted into the physical spaces their census numbers claimed they already occupied. Architecture aligns globally in ways official histories struggle to explain. Domes, columns, star-shaped fortifications, neoclassical proportions appear across continents with striking uniformity. Buildings in India, Russia, and the Americas share not just general styles but specific proportional relationships, construction techniques, and decorative patterns. Official histories credit independent development, parallel evolution of architectural knowledge, or limited cultural exchange through trade routes and educated travelers. But independent invention explains coincidence, not uniformity. When similar needs produce similar solutions in isolation, basic shelter, fortification, and storage, we expect functional convergence. Pointed arches to distribute weight, thick walls for defense, sloped roofs for drainage. These similarities arise from shared constraints of physics and materials. What appears in global architecture goes beyond functional convergence. The proportions match too precisely. The decorative vocabulary repeats too exactly. Star forts with identical geometric planning principles appear in Belgium, Sri Lanka, and South America, locations with no documented exchange of military engineering knowledge during their supposed construction periods. Neoclassical governmental buildings in Washington, D.C. mirror those in St. Petersburg with proportional relationships that cannot be explained by architects merely working in the same general style. Proportions matter. Local records credit different builders, different sponsors, and different construction periods. Yet the underlying architectural language remains consistent, a coherent system applied globally, transcending the limitations of documented cultural contact. Trade routes existed, certainly. Architects traveled, studied foreign buildings, and returned with influences. But this mechanism produces variation within similarity, local adaptation of foreign ideas. It does not produce exact replication of complex proportional systems across isolated regions. The architectural historian would point to pattern books, published designs, and shared classical sources. Roman architectural principles were studied and copied across Europe and beyond. This explains some consistency. But pattern books document design principles, not precise execution. They provide templates, not exact measurements. They inspire variation, not duplication. Pattern alone does not fully account for what we see. The buildings suggest inheritance of a unified system rather than independent evolution towards similar results. The same proportional ratios, the same construction methods, the same decorative grammar. Not similar, identical in ways that independent development cannot produce. Variations exist, certainly. Local materials, available technologies, specific site constraints all introduce differences. But beneath the variations, the underlying system holds constant. Uniformity suggests inheritance. What was inherited? From whom? Official histories provide no source civilization sophisticated enough, widespread enough, unified enough to leave such comprehensive architectural legacy across all inhabited continents. Comprehensive legacy raises a question. In cities worldwide, original ground floors sit below modern street level. Basements that were once first stories, windows now half buried, doorways requiring descent rather than entry. Official explanations point to urban development. Streets raised over centuries as infrastructure improved, new paving laid over old, gradual accumulation of urban sediment. This process occurs naturally. Rome, London, Paris all show archaeological layers documenting the gradual rise of street levels over millennia. Street levels have changed over time, but sediment analysis in many cities suggests rapid deposition, not gradual buildup. Layers that should represent centuries of slow accumulation appear compressed, uniform, consistent with sudden coverage rather than incremental burial. Streets show evidence of being raised deliberately in short periods, not slowly buried over generations. Infrastructure changes that conventional histories attribute to centuries appear to have occurred within decades. Rapid deposition is significant. Photographs from the late 19th century capture this transition moment. Buildings with grand entrances now accessed by descending steps. Windows at modern basement level showing decorative elements consistent with above-ground architecture. Street-level architecture visible below modern pavement during utility excavations. The visual evidence documents not gradual burial but sudden disconnection between original building design and current street level. Photographs record the change. The pattern appears globally. European cities explain it through medieval accumulation. American frontier cities have no such explanation. They supposedly built their streets at current levels from founding, yet excavations reveal earlier levels below. Asian cities show the same buried architecture. South American cities document original ground floors now subterranean. Global patterns demand explanation. Official explanation requires coordinated street raising projects across dozens of cities, different continents, various governmental systems, all deciding simultaneously to elevate infrastructure. Records describe some deliberate street improvements, but they do not document the scale of change that photographic and archaeological evidence reveals. Something buried these buildings partially, uniformly, globally. Uniformly buried structures are puzzling. A flood need not be global to be civilizational. Regional catastrophes occurring within a concentrated time period could produce similar results across widespread areas without requiring a single worldwide event. Climate disruption, seismic activity, atmospheric changes, any of these could trigger rapid sediment deposition, infrastructure damage, requiring adaptation, populations forced to rebuild atop ruins rather than clear them completely. Rapid regional events could explain the pattern. What gets buried is often what no longer fits the narrative being constructed. Architectural features suggesting different purposes, different populations, different time periods. Evidence of systems that do not align with the official story of gradual development and organic growth. And what no longer fits must be forgotten, covered over, literally and historically. Forgotten things are often buried. Not an apocalypse in the popular sense, no sudden extinction, no dramatic end visible in the geological record. A correction instead, a catastrophe around 1700, possibly climatic, geological, atmospheric, or a combination of these, that erases population density while leaving infrastructure largely intact. The survivors scatter, memory fragments into isolated communities with no written records, no coordinated historical accounts, no preserved institutional knowledge. Evidence suggests this possibility without proving it. Climate data from the period shows anomalies, the Maunder minimum bringing reduced solar activity, colder temperatures, failed harvests. Tree ring data indicates climate stress. Historical records note years without summer, crop failures, and population movements. But official histories frame these as hardships overcome, not civilization-ending catastrophes. Yet the demographic patterns suggest more than hardship. They suggest absence followed by replacement. Census records that restart rather than continue. Genealogies that terminate and begin again. Architecture that precedes the population supposedly inhabiting it. orphan surges, providing replacement humans with no traceable origins. If the hypothesis holds, repopulation follows predictable patterns. Survivors regroup in coastal areas with maritime access. Port cities recover first, showing earlier population growth than interior regions. Infrastructure remains largely usable. Stone buildings weather catastrophe better than populations. New inhabitants move into prepared spaces, claiming buildings they did not construct, inheriting systems they did not design. Official records smooth this transition. Dates adjust to remove gaps. Construction credits assigned to builders who arrive afterward. Historical narratives emphasize continuity, even where rupture occurred. Educational systems teach progression where reset happened. The alternative timeline becomes invisible beneath the official story imposed over it. This is not proof. Pattern alignment is not verification. But consider what evidence would remain after 2 centuries of official history writing. Photographs showing empty infrastructure, census anomalies, genealogical dead ends, orphan documentation, architectural sophistication preceding recorded population sophistication, global architectural uniformity, buried ground floors suggesting rapid environmental change, world exhibitions revealing inherited buildings. Every anomaly examined aligns with the reset hypothesis. Every contradiction dissolves if reset occurred. The official story explains each anomaly individually. Long exposures make empty photographs. Immigration drives population surges. International trade spreads architectural knowledge. Urban development buries ground floors. Poverty creates orphans. Industrialization funds world fairs. Each explanation sounds reasonable in isolation. Together they require accepting dozens of coincidental anomalies occurring simultaneously across global civilization. Alignment repeated becomes pattern. And pattern repeated suggests something the official story cannot accommodate, that history is less inheritance than assignment. History fills gaps smoothly when witnesses disappear. Dynasties extend to cover suspicious periods. Dates adjust to eliminate uncomfortable discontinuities. Builders receive posthumous credit for works they may never have overseen. Education systems teach flow where rupture may have existed, progression where reset might have occurred. Official records acknowledge losses while minimizing their implications. Municipal archives note records reconstructed following fire, documentation damaged by flood, estimates provided, archives relocated during renovation, with some materials lost. Each explanation sounds mundane. Accidents happen, records burn, floods damage, bureaucracy fails, but the pattern holds across cities, nations, continents. Archives everywhere report reconstruction of lost records from the same general period, late 17th century through mid-18th century. What burned? What flooded? The records do not specify beyond vague catastrophe. They describe reconstruction efforts, scholars consulting surviving fragments, officials filling gaps with estimated information, historians creating coherent narratives from incomplete sources. The reconstructed records integrate seamlessly with what followed. They provide the missing continuity, establishing connection between fragmented past and documented present. But reconstruction is indistinguishable from invention when original witnesses are gone. A record recreated from memory becomes authoritative if no contrary evidence exists. Estimated population figures become census data. Inferred construction dates become historical fact. Assumed genealogies become family trees. The reconstruction provides what the official narrative requires: smooth transition, logical progression, unbroken chain connecting present to past. Some archives preserve the uncertainty. Marginal notes acknowledge reconstructed or estimated beside specific entries. But these qualifications fade from secondary sources. Historical summaries omit the uncertainty. Textbooks present reconstructed information as verified fact. The infrastructure of official history absorbs reconstruction, presenting it as original record. Contemporary scholars rarely question this process. Reconstruction seems necessary. History requires documentation. Documentation sometimes disappears. Responsible historians fill gaps as accurately as possible using available evidence. The alternative, leaving gaps unfilled, acknowledging unknown periods, accepting discontinuity in historical record, violates academic tradition of comprehensive narrative. Yet unfilled gaps might be more honest than smooth invention. Unknown might be more accurate than estimated. Discontinuity might reflect actual rupture rather than bureaucratic failure. The archives document one clear fact: records from the critical period largely disappeared. Whether they disappeared through mundane accident or systematic catastrophe determines whether reconstruction reveals past or invents it. Lost to what? The archives do not answer. The reconstruction papers over the question. The official history moves forward, having filled the gap. And what was lost remains lost. Not just records, but the truth about why they needed reconstruction at all. Millions cannot trace lineage beyond the late 18th century. Family trees end abruptly at great-great-grandparents with no prior generations documented. Church records restart in the early 1700s with no explanation for missing earlier registers. Genealogical research hits consistent barriers, the same time period, the same absence of documentation, the same terminuses where family history simply stops. Professional genealogists recognize this pattern. They develop strategies for working around it: alternative documentation sources, indirect evidence, probabilistic reconstruction. They frame it as expected difficulty, given record-keeping limitations of earlier eras. But the consistency troubles those who notice. Not scattered gaps affecting random families, systematic absence affecting nearly everyone who searches beyond a certain point. Identity depends on continuity. Personal identity connects to family identity, which connects to ancestral identity, which connects to historical identity. The narrative we tell about ourselves references the narrative our families tell, which references the narrative our culture tells about its past. When that chain breaks, identity becomes untethered from deep time. It floats in the present, connected only to recent generations, unable to anchor in the distant past most take for granted. For many, this poses no problem. 3 or 4 generations suffice for family stories. Beyond that, specifics matter less than general heritage, national, ethnic, or religious identity transmitted culturally rather than genealogically. But for those who search, who try to map complete lineages, who pursue documentation to its limits, they encounter the wall, the point where records end, where family lines terminate, where institutional documentation provides no further depth. This pattern becomes personally disturbing only when recognized as pattern rather than individual misfortune. One family lacking records suggests poor preservation, records lost to fire or flood, ancestors who migrated and left no trace. Millions of families encountering the same barrier suggests systematic absence. Not bad luck multiplied, structure revealed. If ancestry was assigned rather than inherited, if populations repopulated rather than continued, if genealogies were reconstructed rather than preserved, then identity becomes institutional rather than ancestral. We are who records say we are, connected to pasts that documentation provides rather than blood transmits. And institutions rarely confess their reconstructive work. They present assigned identities as discovered identities, manufactured lineages as recovered lineages, estimated connections as verified connections. The infrastructure of identity requires continuity. When continuity breaks, infrastructure conceals the break, smoothing the gap, filling the absence, maintaining the fiction of unbroken descent. The buildings remain. Limestone and granite endure where memory fails. The streets still wait for crowds, broad avenues designed for populations that arrived gradually after infrastructure stood complete. The photograph from the beginning reappears in imagination, seen differently now through accumulated evidence. This is not emptiness captured by primitive technology. The aftermath was documented by cameras that arrived just as repopulation began. The silence in those images is the silence between catastrophe and recovery, infrastructure inherited, systems claimed, spaces slowly refilling with new inhabitants who would be taught they built what they merely occupied. The Chicago World's Fair reveals itself differently. Not a temporary exhibition, but a temporary revelation. Inherited buildings displayed briefly before being dismantled and erased, leaving only photographs and memories that would be reinterpreted as American achievement rather than global inheritance. The orphan trains appear as a population insertion system, distributing undocumented people into prepared spaces and creating genealogies that would be accepted as natural lineage. The census jumps become repopulation markers, moments when official records begin acknowledging inhabitants who had been moving into emptied cities, filling roles that documentation would assign retroactively. The buried ground floors mark the catastrophe's physical signature, rapid, environmental change that infrastructure survived but original populations did not. Every anomaly resolves if the premise holds. Every contradiction dissolves if a reset occurred. The alternative history is not proven. Pattern alignment is not verification. Accumulated anomaly is not conclusive evidence. Official explanations remain possible. Conventional history might still be accurate, its coincidences merely unfortunate timing, its gaps merely bureaucratic failure. But perhaps this is only coincidence, or perhaps civilization did not evolve here, it resumed. Perhaps the world we inherit was inherited by those before us, who were themselves inheritors of what came before, in cycles we cannot trace because the records designed to show continuity were created to obscure rupture. The investigation continues. Not in archives alone, those have yielded their patterns, but in personal recognition. Each family tree that terminates unexpectedly. Each photograph showing empty streets in supposedly thriving cities. Each building suggesting sophistication beyond its documented builders. Each census margin noting origin unknown. The pattern waits for those willing to see it. The evidence accumulates for those willing to question. The alternative history persists beneath the official story, visible to those who look. A census margin noting reconstructed estimate. A buried doorway descending to what was once ground level. A child's intake form reading origin unknown. Parents deceased, details unavailable. An empty street in a photograph dated 1890, showing infrastructure complete and population absent. If the world ended quietly once, with catastrophe leaving buildings intact, but populations scattered, memory fragmented and continuity broken, how would we know it has not happened before? How would we recognize reset when institutional history is designed to show progression? How would we detect repopulation when census records are retroactively smoothed? The photograph remains in the archive. Market Square, Stockholm, circa 1890. Streets empty, buildings waiting, no people visible in spaces designed for crowds. The caption offers no explanation beyond date and location. The image speaks its truth to those willing to hear. Documentation of a moment between ending and beginning, infrastructure inherited, and population not yet fully inserted into the historical record. Official history provides answers, long exposure, deliberate staging, photographic limitation. Each explanation resolves the single anomaly. None explain the pattern, the global consistency, the demographic impossibilities, the architectural synchronicity, the genealogical terminations, the orphan surges, the census adjustments, the reconstructed records, the buried cities, the revealed exhibitions. the implications resist comfortable resolution. If the past was reset, then identity is institutional assignment rather than ancestral inheritance. If history was reconstructed, then education is narrative control rather than knowledge transmission. If civilization resumed rather than evolved, then progress is reclamation rather than innovation. These possibilities disturb because they undermine assumptions required for cultural coherence. We need continuity. We require traceable lineage. We depend on verified progression from primitive to sophisticated, from ancient to modern, from chaos to order. The alternative, rupture, loss, reconstruction, imposed narrative, suggests a fragility we prefer not to acknowledge. The photograph offers no conclusions, it documents a moment. The interpretation remains open, but the pattern persists across evidence types, geographic regions, time periods, and documentation systems. The anomalies align too consistently to dismiss. The synchronicity suggests structure beneath the official story. If you look, you will see. If you see, you cannot unsee. The question remains not whether to believe, but whether to investigate what official history prefers left unexamined. The photograph remains.